Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Child Psych Podcast. My name is Tammy, and I'm a registered child psychologist, a registered play therapist. I'm the co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology, and I am also a mom to three amazing kids. And we are so grateful to have Eileen Henry with us today to talk everything sleep, whether you have an infant or a toddler. I am so lucky I'm out of that phase with my kids, but I remember being very entrenched in that phase with my kids. And I am so on board with your approach to sleep. So I'm so excited to talk to everyone about this today. Eileen Henry is an RIE resource for infant educators, associate, and a member of the International Association of Child Sleep Consultants. She's a pioneer in the field of sleep specialists and helped families across the globe find peaceful sleep for over 2 decades. She is the author of the book Compassionate Sleep Solution and highly sought out keynote speaker. Her sleep program is rooted in the RIE approach and regulatory theory. Sleep is a side effect of a nurturing environment and a secure attachment and regulated nervous system. And Eileen has shared her expertise with local hospitals and pediatricians all over the globe. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your book. We talked, I read through it yesterday morning in the wee early hours of the morning.
Oh my gosh.
And I was just like, yeah, parents need to read this stuff. Like, this is wonderful. And we'll talk about the other approaches as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just am really on board, especially in terms of you talking about attachment and the parents' regulation. Is that feeding so much into the kiddo's nervous system? So that's like such a high, that's very aligned with our organization. So super
Great. And that's the hardest part. It was the hardest part for me, for sure.
So let's start off with a listener question. Hi, Eileen. I'm a new mom and I feel like I'm going crazy from lack of sleep. My daughter is 5 months old and I'm trying to get her to sleep in her own crib instead of the bed with us. I want a secure attachment with my child, so I don't want to let her cry it out, but I also need to sleep or I feel like I'm completely checked out from my child. How can I prioritize my sleep without harming the relationship with my daughter? I feel that as a mom, I remember transitioning from co-sleeping to his bedroom. Like, that's a horrible feeling when they're used to you being there and then you're not there.
Yes. And there's still, at 5 months, there's still an authentic need for food in the night.
Yeah, that's
probably one feeding in the night, unless the child has self-weaned. Some 4 or 5 month olds just start sleeping through and not needing food in the night. But most 5 month olds still need one feeding in the night. So one thing you can do is you don't have to transition your child to another room. You could transition your child to a bassinet or a co-sleeper. That might feel better than putting your baby in a completely separate room. I think a 5 month old has some data on object permanence, but they haven't really completely gotten object permanence as they will in the 7th and 8th month. Understanding that when we're not there, we don't cease to exist. And so that can help as well when the infant has that understanding. So I would say transitioning into a crib. Now, as soon as you do that, because your baby's used to being all warm and cozy by you, I do something that I call anything we use to fix the child's sleep. If we're nursing them to sleep, rocking them to sleep, holding them to sleep, touching them to sleep, have them right there until they're asleep, I call those sleep crutches. Now, crutches are wonderful. They're helpful. We use them until we don't need them anymore. A 5 month old can learn to just fall at the onset of the night on that still, silent surface of the co-sleeper. So when we're doing all this facilitation that we need to do for newborns, when we're doing all that, we fix that falling. That's going to be the most disorienting thing. And a 5 month old, the first thing I would ask is, how is your 5 month old's moral reflex? Has that integrated into the reflexes? Have they integrated into the nervous system? There's some of them still have more integration to do, right? And so if your baby is still doing the startle reflex, it's going to be harder because every time you put him, is it a boy or girl? I didn't remember. Every time you put your baby in the bassinet and they start to drift off, that moral reflex kicks in. So swaddling can help a little bit at this stage, unless your baby's already started to roll around and then the swaddle's not safe. You got to bust out of the swaddle. A sleep sack can help. It just gives them that sense of coziness and a little bit of weight. I'm not into the weighted sleep sacks unless an OT or a PT has recommended them. I find that not all bodies like weight on them.
Honestly, I used a sleep sack with my son, not a weighted one, just like it depending
Yeah.
on the material, the time of year, because I live in Canada and it gets really
Yes.
in our house in the winter. So sometimes it was like a really thick material, and the summer it was very light. But honestly, he used sleep sacks till he was four or five.
I did the same.
Because he kicked the blanket off all the time, and he
Yes.
liked being swaddled. He hated being swaddled, actually.
Mine did too. And I would zip up that sleep sack and they would just kind of relax into it. It's like something about it feels cuddly. It feels snuggly. It feels like you're wrapped in or being held. So I would transition into sometimes just moving the bassinet to the foot of the bed gives a little bit of separation from the sensory input of our presence, our breathing, our smell, we're right there, and work on that. Now, what's going to happen, you're going to put your baby down and your baby's going to start to cry. And that's where we start an incremental process of stepping away, touching, soothing, regulating, stepping away, sitting back. Like you might come and go from a chair in the room. You're really close by. So if you decide to put your baby in another room, or I have a lot of parents, the first nursery is a walk-in closet. They put them in a walk-in closet and just open the door a little bit so they can attend. They're right there.
I did that on vacation with my son. I remember we rented a lake house and he was
Closet
little.
babies. I love them.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm not putting him in another room. We're in this strange house. So
Right.
we walk in closet. So I was like, I'm putting him in here. Like, and then I could just get up and
Yes.
I'm right there. Like it's the same room.
Yes. They're great. I've had families turn them into, put a gate on the door and put a mattress, and that's like the child's first bedroom. It's like a little child cave. They're awesome.
Yeah.
So close by, when you put them down, the crying starts, and I go over that more in my book. You read that part, the cycling cry. This is where you discern as a mother for your 5-month-old how much struggle your 5-month-old can handle. And if the cry starts to escalate and get too intense, pick up, soothe, reset, put back down. So there's a method called the pick up, put down method. It's a little stimulating, I think, for the brain, that every time they cry, you pick them up, and when they're calm, you put them down. There's a middle way that I talk about, that sometimes we're actually putting them down when they're fussing and they're crying a little bit, but not when they're screaming. When they're screaming and the cry gets intense, like on a 10 of a 1 to 10 scale, that needs co-regulation. We pick them up, hold them, reset.
Yeah, I noticed that when my son, he's our youngest, was little, I would wait at the door. Now we co-slept for a long time and he slept in our room for a while. So this is like, I think, I don't know, 6 or 7 months in. But still, I would listen and I would wait, because I noticed, because again, you like you said, you investigate a little, because I know the panic cry, and then there's a hunger cry. There's different cries.
Yes.
But he this little fussy cry right before he'd fall asleep, which was very different than the panicked cry. And so if I just waited 1 minute, like that little fuss, often he'd just fall asleep, but he wasn't crying for 30 minutes. It was
right.
like 1 or 2 minutes. And it's right before he'd fall asleep. And I thought, that's so interesting. It's not panicked. It's this fussy cry, like almost like a little, and he just go to sleep. I thought, oh, okay. So that's what you're talking about, the difference between wailing and then this kind of, I don't know how to make it, but I do the difference.
Exactly. So I call it the difference between struggle and suffering. Children, for a long time, part of the cry is they feel crummy. They're tired. They want to go to sleep, but they can't know that. They don't know they feel crummy because they're tired. They just know they feel crummy, and we're supposed to fix it.
My 16-year-old doesn't know that. We're like, you need to go to bed. You're cranky. She's like, I'm not tired. I'm like,
it takes a while to learn that. It does. And we want them to learn that.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is, and we'll talk about the couple of the different other methods that are quite
Yeah,
popular. And what I'm hearing is this isn't crying it out, it's understanding the different kinds of cries. And I know you have a method in your book that kind of talks about tracking that, like understanding and listening for the cycle. And you kind of
yes,
have a little map for parents to follow to understand
yeah.
the trajectory of the crying process and like when would be kind of the time to intervene and when is it time to just wait a little bit.
Just to step back and wait, maybe a minute, maybe two, maybe three, and coming and going because they recognize that. Your 5-month-old does recognize you coming and going. I like to make sure there's certain markers that I like to make sure are in place. One of them that is the baby can see further out than a foot. They're tracking people from across the room. They're smiling, they're cooing, they're engaging, they're starting to become highly relational. They coo back and forth and smile, and they have some like that moral reflex is integrated. And there are a few other markers. I don't remember if I talked about them in my book or not, but that tells me that the self-soothing mechanism is at least online when all of these relational pieces of our child start to fall into place and they really become interactive babies. And
Beautiful.
especially that tracking across the room, they can see because then they see people going in and going out, especially if they have an older sibling, a toddler. There's no one better to learn object permanence from than a toddler because they're everywhere all at once. They're in and out and they can hear them in another room down the street. It's great.
Yeah. Well, and it just a lot of this comes down to I'm hearing two stages of development because you're talking
Yes.
reflexes. So I know when my son was young, one of my friends in her infinite wisdom, thank goodness, said, you need this app called, I think it was the Wonder Years. And I was able to track based on his age what was happening with him developmentally. So he'd be sleeping well for a month and all of a sudden he'd stop sleeping. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong as a parent? And you go down the shame spiral and
Exactly.
you're
Oh,
panicking
yeah.
and you're like, oh, here's the app. This is what's going on in his brain right now. Of course, there's a lot wiring up right now. This makes sense why he's
Yes.
not sleeping. And then I could just relax that nothing was wrong with my kid. Like, I'm
Right.
not a bad mom.
Right. You could sit back and let it happen. That's all good news that they're waking up, their brain's waking up. Why a lot of wiring is happening. A lot of skills are being learned. And it's just like there's this bloom and they open up and they wake up. And sometimes it happens in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Well, that's a praying. We don't get to decide that. The brain's doing lots of work. And a lot of the development happens only when we're sleeping. And a lot of people don't know that's the time when the
Yes.
brain needs to wire up and it assimilates information that they've learned throughout the day. That happens during sleep.
Yes, it
So
does.
if they're practicing lots of things and
Oh,
achieving
yeah.
lots of information, all of a sudden the brain's trying to put that places and organize these neural connections. And kids like, oh, I'm awake now. Like, thanks, brain. Thanks for doing that.
Yes, it is. It's a busy. I say that crib in the night is one of the busiest places in the house.
Yeah, because it was neat. In your book, you talked a lot about like to normalize how much the brain is growing in those first 2 years. Like one of the stats you gave was, and I knew that, I mean, by 5, we know 95% of our brain development's done, but your baby is only born with 25 of its brain mass. And by the time they're 2, they have 80%. Like, holy cow,
Yeah,
that's a lot of change.
that is. It's dynamic.
Yeah. And that causes sleep disruptions. And those are those leaps that kids, and you speak about like that development
Yes.
happens.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean there's a bad parent. It's just that brain's got a lot to do in those 2 years.
Yes. And when we take big leaps in development, even throughout development, hopefully we keep developing our whole lives. When we take big leaps, the brain and the body will often go back and pick up what it does well, what it already knows how to do, and practice that again to take it into the new area of learning. And so what can look like regressions, it's only really a regression if we follow it. I like to not focus on the regression because we tend to follow what we focus on, to focus on the leap. Now, if there is a regression, we support it. Maybe they do need a little more support reassurance in a regression. I'd say separation ambivalence, separation anxiety can look like a regression. And that does need attending to.
Absolutely. And you do discuss a lot of what infants need throughout their day, which is what I really appreciate that approach. I think we get so focused on the problem, which is lack of sleep, and I need to get them to sleep, and I need to sleep because I'm this poor mom who called in. They're tired and they're exhausted. And they just like want the end result. But one of the things your book really dives into are all of these things our kids need throughout the day to ensure they can fall asleep. And that
Yes.
we forget to kind of investigate some of those areas. Could you speak to some of those areas that we need to consider? I guess it's like for sleep hygiene. I guess that would be.
Yeah, that's definitely sleep hygiene. You know, what we're going to do. I look at sleep hygiene when we're coming into the evening, like how do we set up the evening that's going to best support sleep? Child sleep, I like to look at it from wake up in the morning. So in RIE, we talk a lot about this of the dependable, predictable routine of the day, how to build a routine based on the authentic needs of the child. I prefer that to a schedule. I think schedules can teach children more about us than their sense of self. So we want to build it around their authentic needs. Well, good news, most infants, toddlers at a certain developmental stage, it happens at about the same time every day, right? There's a wake window anytime between 6 and 7 is normal. Sadly, I found out this year that 5 a.m. is a normal wake up time for children. It's just a bummer.
I knew that. My son, he still is, he's 8 now. I mean,
You had an early riser?
yeah, but I'm an early riser, so thank goodness. So at least
Right.
I'm a parent who gets up early anyway. So my husband, not so much.
See, it was flipped in our house, and early risers are that is a genetic component. And 5 a.m. is early for most of us, but it's not really, that's an authentic wake time for many humans. And so it starts in the day that how the day rolls out. We want a dependable, predictable routine because infants, even the young infant, is very tuned into the context of their environment, the physical environment, and the emotional tone of the relational field in their environment. And when we set up a pretty predictable routine around their needs, you wake up, we eat. Maybe you have some playtime, some downtime, some hanging out time. I mean, for an infant, then they're ready for a nap again. So we're building a routine, let's say for your 5, 6-month-old that we were just talking about, that's going to have 3 naps a day. And depending on those naps, that baby might have what I call a swing nap at the end of the day, right? Just it's like, yeah, maybe a 30-minute catch-up nap so that bedtime isn't at 5 p.m. So we build that routine of the day, the most important ritual and routine for families, and it's the hardest time of the day when everyone comes together in the evening before dinner. There's a lot to get done. That part, I really like to build something that we look forward to, turn off all devices. You come in, come together, greet each other, connect. That's the best time for big movement, big body, big movement play. Then we're going into dinner, then books, then bath, and then into the bedroom. And that's the most intimate ritual. Little ones, even a 6-month-old, is highly attuned to ritual. They're very embodied, and they're learning everything through the physicality, the physical repetition of us providing care for them. And so it's never too early to start building a very close, intimate ritual with little ones. And they just, it's irresistible to them.
People made fun of me, actually, my family, how married I was to that with my son, because if he didn't have it, it was just he was already an early riser and he's super active. So it took him quite a while to fall asleep. It was never quick for him. He was a good sleeper, but like getting there took some time. And I was just like, no, like we are home after dinner. And because there's a whole thing that has to happen. And
Yes.
he would get there, but the second I disrupted that, so everyone's like, you need to be more flexible. In Europe, they do this. I was like, I'm telling you, for this kid, my daughters are different, but for this kid, he needs it. Like that's the only way, because it just takes him so long to settle otherwise. Even to this day, like he's just a kid that takes time to settle.
And it's interesting. My 23-year-old was like that, exactly like that as young. And now it's built into his life that he cares, that part of himself he takes great care of, because he likes to get up and go surfing early in the morning. He likes to get up and go fly fishing early in the morning. He's a very physical dude. And he cares for that part of himself. He'll give himself the downtime. It's really beautiful. And this is what I hope for parents, for us to tune into them and get to know them and that particular need of your son. When we attend to it, it unfolds and it makes it so much easier for them and us. And then we can create something we look forward to. And our children feel that.
Yeah,
When
they
we
do.
look
They feel
forward to it.
Yeah, I know just parents, like one of the things she outlines in her book, she really talks about that routine and just like these markers are, food, love, play, and then of course the sleep that follows, which is what everyone's focused on who's listening to this podcast. But, routine is a huge part of that. And also like kids getting tummy time and exploring and all those things and that love, that attachment. And that can be really hard when parents are working. Like I know, especially I'm in Canada, so most moms here have a year of mat leave. So they have
That's
a year with
beautiful.
their infant. And even in other places, it would be longer. But I know I have, I went to school in the States and I know there's so many moms listening who had 3 months,
I
3 weeks even.
I
So
know.
any recommendations? Like we're really trying to build that relationship. Is the evenings what you would focus on then if they have to work
Yeah,
in the
evenings and weekends.
evenings and
Even
weekends?
the morning, that's where you're going to hold on to breastfeeding probably longer. That morning where you really connect, to take time to connect and increase the quality of the time if you feel like the quantity of the time is challenged. When we come back together at the end of the day, it's our presence that we come back and we're very present. There was a lot of the study of rye was done in Palo Alto. There was a center there, a rye daycare, and it was built around these principles. And the mothers would come early, come in, and stay for a little bit with the child. Maybe even nurse them and have put them down for their first nap. So they built a routine around the mother and child coming in the morning and making that transition. So if you can work with your daycare provider or anything that you can do to make that transition, that handoff, so that we slow down, we get present, and it becomes meaningful, because children are making meaning in their bodies first before they make meaning here with language, right? And so it's the physicality of it, it's the presence, it's the attunement, it's coming together, that and on weekends, really planning your time. And the routine of the day really tells the child where they are. This is what's happening. This is what's happening next.
It's that rhythm, right? That rhythm and predictability that I think our brainstem, a really lower part of our brain, leans into. And so whenever we can create rhythm for a child, I don't care if they're 6 months old or they're 14 years
Yes.
old. We all
Yes.
like to know what's coming next.
Yes.
Don't do well. It's the devil you know and the devil you don't. Like people
Right.
like to be able to predict with it as much as they can, because anything novel, too novel, sends the amygdala, says it's danger. Like we're meant to pay attention to that. And then we have this cortisol flowing through our body because we're meant to attune to any changes in our world, because it could be a saber-toothed tiger, it could be an avalanche, it could be a forest fire.
Right.
So I think creating as much predictability like you're talking about.
Predictability is really good. I think children are better at improv, and they're and there are, thank goodness for my children. They've gotten me like way more flexible in my life. And they are more of a novel seeking brain, and that we can build that into the ritual. Something new that happened on that's great for toddlers. If we get too rote and too predictable, the toddler will throw something in there to make it interesting. And that's where we can invite something in, a new character in the story, a butterfly we saw on a walk before dinner. It's something, we bring something into the bedtime story to light them up and get them present in the process. That can be really sweet.
Lovely. There were two approaches in your book that you mentioned. And I think a lot of parents are moving away from the first, but it still exists, which is,
Yes.
verberizing your kids, let them cry it out, self-soothe.
Yes.
And the
Mhm.
second would be listen till they sleep. But on the contrary, you do say that the second method would be okay with 0 to 4. But maybe you can walk us through why you wouldn't recommend you kind of move away from those approaches and what they are.
So, yes. So the Ferber method, the cry it out, classic cry it out, it's a timed approach. So it's clock driven. I prefer communication driven than clock. The clock is helpful because when your baby starts to cry, when my baby started to cry, all the alarms went off and 5 minutes felt like 35 minutes. Literally, my husband turned around the clock. He said, I'm dealing with the nap. I've got him. And he was going through the process, and I was just kind of white knuckling it and going, okay, it's cool. He's okay. He's with his daddy. And he turned around before he said, how long do you think that was? I said, I don't know, 25 minutes. And it was 7 minutes. That's how distorted I got when the cry was in my presence. So cry it out, classic cry it out is a timed approach. You go 5, 10, 15. It works. For some children, it works. And it's fine. And it doesn't harm the attachment. Built in within the attachment, there's enough repair and enough in sync time that mismatch, repair, disconnect, connection. There's enough of it in the 24 hours of the day that it's fine. The baby's fine. They learn how to sleep. Some children, we touch sleep like that and we never have to touch it again. Some development comes up every time, and parents find every 3 months they're having to do cried out again. I think some children aren't ready for cried out. It's too much separation too fast, and it stresses the nervous system. Will that nervous system repair? Probably. I just don't like to think that there's a highly sensitive child who we started cried out with too young, and there's a little bit of anxiety baked into the sleep process that's supposed to be really beautiful and relaxing, right? I don't like it when that happens. A lot of people come to me after they've done cried out and they're just like, that I can't do it again.
No,
So
I couldn't just for me personally, I couldn't. I mean, I also have the option of co-sleeping, which we can always touch on, and that works.
oh yeah.
So I was like, why would I do that when they just like I breastfeed in the middle of the night? Like I sleep beautifully, he sleeps beautifully, it's fine.
Yay.
But by the time he transitioned, there were times where there was some crying, but it wasn't a ton. And I also I think I was worried about probably like the mom who called in. I was like, no, attachment. I couldn't do it.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't let him cry on his own during the day either. I would sit with him, right? Like I would sit in the room and co-regulate.
Yes.
So if that's maybe not an option for a mom, and they can always look it up if they want. What you talk about this now, the other approach is listen till they sleep.
Listen till they sleep. So we stay with them and we listen to their expressions and we soothe them and we stay with them. Unfortunately, the stay and pay, I call it you stay and pay. It's like, because our presence for 2 decades, maybe longer, inspires in our children longing and desire for us to do something for them, usually, because it's part of that's what they've learned. We nurture, we care. My kids know when they come home from college, I will do their laundry. Maybe it depends on how long they stay, but I will help them do their laundry. I'll cook for them. I'm gonna, do all this stuff for them. It's great. And then if it's longer than a week, now they have to unload the dishwasher and I'll start cleaning up the kitchen. But staying with them, first of all, the parent has to be really regulated to be an emotional anchor for the child. But being present with all the cries, if we can stay really regulated, I think is great. As children get older, they have object permanence. They're coming into 8, 9, 10, and even toddlerhood. Coming and going can give them a break. It gives them a break from that longing and desire and standing there, and they're standing in their crib and they're just crying at us. It can give them a break from that. And they have some language reception. And that's where I encourage parents to do a dress rehearsal. Before you start, have one last night, talk them through it, have a process that you go through it with them before you change anything, because they're so embodied and they understand enough language, and they really, what they don't have as far as verbs and nouns and language, they make up for in tone, our physicality, our body tone, and our facial expression. So if we can walk them through the process and give them a dress rehearsal and show them before we change anything, it has a big impact on 10, 11, 12 and up. As they get later, we do older toddlers, we do an actual play scenario with loveys and characters before we change anything. And then we have one last night, and then we tell them, you're going to fall asleep in your crib. And this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to come and go, or I'm going to sit in this chair until you fall asleep. The problem with that, we have to make really clear, if we're going to stay in the chair while we fall asleep, that once you're asleep, I'm going to my bed.
Yeah, they wake up in a panic if
Yeah.
you're not there. So
Yeah.
I hear
So
that.
we want to tell them that. And then that can create hypervigilance, and they're still like, hey, come get back in the chair. Get back in here. So then we work on that. But staying present with them and co-sleeping, all of that. Like, I don't have much judgment around it. I just don't want parents to think it's a make or break thing. Like, you try something, and if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. We're going to change what we're doing with I loved Magda Gerber said, we're going to change what we're doing with our children, hopefully, many, many, many times through development. The only thing we need to do is have the awareness that I either can't or won't do this anymore, and then look at the child and say, hey, I can't do this anymore. I won't do this anymore. And then we invite them in and show them the change. We physicalize that change and show them. Makes a huge difference.
So your approach, I'm hearing, is kind of you talk about it, it's kind of think of like playing the game, and that there is pre-game and then there's the actual game. So you talked about routines and rituals.
Yes, routine and ritual.
Those we mentioned those earlier on, is ensuring like there's a ritual before bed and there's routines throughout the day. Is that correct? You say?
Yes.
And then it's go time. So then we think of the game, and your approach is more of a come and go, is what you're saying.
Yes, we come and go, give them time instead of staying the whole time. Now we can modify that. Kim West was the one who came up with the chair method of moving the chair out of the room. Some children, parents are like, oh my God, I'm just going to listen to crying and crying and crying and crying and crying as I move that chair. I think that's a great approach for younger children. There's one thing I wanted to say that there, and Kim West came out a few months ago, maybe last year. And because since we started doing this, there are thousands of sleep consultants. And there was a misunderstanding of her approach. And she had to come out and really clarify that whatever you do, if you stay present and connected. Don't stay present and not look at your baby, because that replicates the still face experiments. Don't do that. They panic.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned that in your book. I actually wrote it down. Oh, where did I? Hold on. Whoever's what? Oh, shoot. It was really. Oh, please do not use the method of sitting stone-faced in the chair or having your back turned to the child. This will freak your child out. Think about it. The cry is supposed to elicit a response. If you are sitting there with a blank face, you look depressed and checked out. This is not good. It is better to be out of the room and come and go. And I was like, yes, because like non-responsive, that's terrifying for kids. It's going to create a very nervous system wired for stress. And if anybody wants to know, go on to YouTube and look up still face experiments.
I can't even look at them.
On it. I show it in my classes all the time. Edward Tronick.
That's the one. Ed Tronick. And yeah, he's great. Edward Tronick, yes. And he recently wrote a new book, The Power of Discord, what discord teaches us about trust, intimacy, and something else. It's resilience, that there is going to be some mismatch. Our children are going to look at us, and they're going to be looking at us, and we're going to have some kind of facial expression that there's a mismatch. It's just part of our humanness. And so that relational inevitability is happening. We don't want to create more of it where we don't need to. It's going to happen anyway. I think every time a parent chooses a need in favor of a want, that's a mismatch.
Mm.
It's a mismatch. It's discord. And our children learn a lot from it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a long learning, like a 17-year learning to discern a need and a want, maybe longer, maybe 30 years. My son says we don't really learn until we have to pay for stuff ourselves. That's when we learn.
There's some pain involved in the process.
Exactly. I said, apparently you need another surfboard. Yeah. Right on.
With your approach, would you say, like, when the parents are coming and going, and I'm going to tell people to just buy the book, and it's going to really explicate, like, you're going to get a step-by-step. But as a parent's listening, I know they're going to be like, well,
Yes.
how long do I go for? How long do I stay? How long do I go? How long? So what would you say to those parents who are just like, tell me that, Eileen.
I understand that. It's like when all of the Rye associates have done time with Alan Shore at UCLA, who's the premier attachment theorist in the United States, possibly the world. And we were just like, how long can they cry? How long? He said, it depends on the cry. It depends on the cry. So there's a subtlety. Yes.
The cry method in your book.
There's a subtlety and a nuance to it. And you learn a lot by diving in and doing it, because your child's changing so much. You're learning a lot about the cry. And the cry is communication as children get older, and we want to listen to it with that. I want to know you. I want to get to know you. I want to understand your communication. There's, a lot of projection on little ones, especially toddlers. Oh, they're working us. They're manipulating us. And not really. They're not. They want to see. They're getting to know us. They want to know where our edge is. What makes them tick? What makes them jump? What makes them respond? How do they respond? What got that response? That's interesting. They're just curious and in wonder. So we want to tune in and get to know them. And I'd say, you can start with 5 minutes and listen. And if you hear the cry has a musical quality to it. It's the worst music to the ears, to be honest. But we'll start to hear as early as 8 months old, the infant will cry and then repeat the cry. Like they'll start to do the kind of a call and response with the self. So the cry has a cycle. It goes up, it crescendos and decrescendos, and crescendos and decrescendos. If it's doing this, at some point it peaks, and maybe that's when we give it another minute. And if we hear the decrescendo, we just let it go out and we check the time. Within 7 minutes, you can usually hear the crescendo, decrescendo. If it starts going up and it goes up and it goes up, we go in. We go in. At first, like the mom of the 5-month-old, she'll go in a ton. That's why I say you may just sit in a chair and stay in the room.
Yeah. And
say, I'm here, I'm listening.
Yeah. And honestly, that worked for me. And I think this is why I love you're not quite married to it has to be this way. Because like any mom's listening, I co-slept for the first 4 months. So I did the feedings. Because he needed to be fed so much, it was exhausting that I was like, to heck with this. Like, I'm just going to, and we did all the things where, like we tucked, the child's not covered in the blanket. I had a net that he could breathe. So in case he fell off, like there's all these things.
You can make it safe. That's the easiest thing to do.
Did all the research, like this is how we're going to do it.
Beautiful.
And he slept. It wasn't until we moved him out of the bed that was the problem. So then we did the method where my husband and I would take turns.
Yes.
In the room. And then we'd like sneak out, and then there'd be a little bit of the fuss. We listen to the cry, and sometimes we go back in, and sometimes we just sit there till he fell asleep, which would take up to an hour. But we had the time; we weren't rushed into activities, and that worked for us. That didn't work forever. It worked for about 6 months, and then things change because then he's a toddler, and then we want to leave the room, and
and then you do the next thing. You can do it in stages. It's not a make or break thing. Now, I'll ask you this: with most of my couples, heterosexual couples.
Yeah.
It's easier for the father than it is for the mother. Was that the case in your house?
he's pretty highly sensitive.
Yeah.
So I think we were about the same.
About the same?
Yeah, I think I had taught him a lot about, like, we talked about attachment and the science. So I think we came in there pretty informed about, like, and we had a game plan from the time he was born, how we were going to handle sleep. So here's the psychologist, like, I'm going to research everything before we do this.
Right,
but
right.
He didn't get sidetracked, and it didn't mean he didn't have, like, I guess, leaps in development where it looked like a regression, like whatever.
Right.
And there were nights we slept on the floor. Like, we literally hauled a mattress in.
Oh yeah, we did that. We had an inflatable mattress.
Because we had switched homes and he was highly anxious because it was in the house.
That's exactly when we switched homes. We moved a lot when we moved to Colorado, and when they were ill, sometimes we all got ill. Everybody just came in bed.
Yeah.
It was just the easiest thing to do.
So I just want to tell parents, no, you can be flexible with this. There's different ways of doing this. But I think what I like about Eileen's work, and I really just encourage you to look at it, is it really prioritizes, like, reading your child's emotional cues, decoding, making sure you as a parent are healthy. She talks a lot about co-regulation, and in order to co-regulate, you have to be self-regulated. She talks about like your relationship with your spouse being important, the routines throughout the day, the importance of play. Like, these are things that, like, we don't live in a vacuum. The family is a living, breathing organism. And they all play into each other. So it's really, I found your book was a game plan for family life. And saying
it is, and in modern life, because really child sleep is incompatible with modernity, with modern day life. So we have to structure it in a way. You know, I always get all these pictures, and people send me pictures, and look at these animals, and they all sleep together, and they're all sleeping together, and everything's so beautiful. Animals do it. That's why we should do it. I'm like, that mother elephant doesn't have to run an ER room. That mother lion doesn't have to show up at court at 8. You know, there's a lot that those animals don't have to do during the day that we do.
And that, I think that it's twofold, which I really want to. Their genetics would say, and I always tell parents this, they are programmed to want to sleep with us because most mammals sleep with their infants. There's that program. When we expect kids for our own sanity to sleep in their own beds because we have to run an ER room, or we have to be in court, or whatever we're doing, or for me, my son was kicking me so much I couldn't sleep at all.
Mine too. We have the same.
Gotta go. Like, this is not working for me. We are fighting against something, a very strong instinct. And that's going to take time and patience to work through. And no, it's hard for parents and it's hard for kids, because we do have that draw to want to stay with our young. But we live in a modern world where that's not always possible. And parents need to keep their mental well-being in check.
Yes, you do. So you're modeling health and well-being. You're modeling what it takes to be resourced. Now, when they become toddlers, when you go on vacation, celebrate. We're not going to get toddlers their own hotel room, or even expect them to sleep in their own bedroom in an Airbnb or a relative's house or whatever. Celebrate. We all come together, and we're going to share the cave. All the little birds are going to come back to the nest, and we're going to make up a story of. I have families do little chapter books of their child's own sleep story. And they have travel chapters, they have new baby chapter, they have all these chapters to prepare the child for what's going to happen, so we can have the flexibility, because it feels so good to have them climb in bed with us and snuggle in bed. I don't want to
still like to do
that away. Yeah.
And they're 10 and 8. My younger two, my 16-year-old doesn't want to do that, but she likes watching movies with us on the couch. That's okay.
There you go.
Yeah. But I want to say, just take a moment to thank you for this. And I'll include a link to your book below, everyone. I've talked to a lot of people on sleep. Eileen is now one of my favorite people. And I've looked at this book. It's flexible. It's adapted. Honored. It honors the brain science. I love Magda Gerber. I love that approach. So I'm going to really, really encourage you to take a look at her resources. Do you provide coaching too?
I do. And I have a free kind of get to know you call if you want to call and ask me some questions, and if you're interested in working with me. I want to make sure we're a good fit. So I do have a free 20-minute call to make sure we're a good fit. And I wish I was more active on Instagram. I just can't. I would like to be, but I will. Every once in a while, I get a good streak in there. But yeah, please contact me, and I do coaching. I have packages or one-offs or whatever you need. I like to assess your needs and your values as a parent and work together in that way.
Yeah. And so I've included in the description of this podcast, everyone, the like her book, her your email. Hopefully you're okay with that. It was in the
Yes,
links,
that's fine.
your blog, and then the Facebook page. And again, everyone, I really appreciate the science that went into her work, the flexibility, and I really find her approach is very holistic. So I'm going to
Good.
just now send people to you. I'm really happy with just everything. Thank you so much. I learned a
Thank
lot.
you, Tammy.
I also felt like I'm like, okay, I didn't screw my kids up when they were learning how to
No,
sleep.
no, we'll screw them up in other ways maybe, but not with this.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great to meet you.
Thank you.